Rabbi, very first question off the bat, how old is the earth? Can science and Tanakh find common ground? There are a lot of things, there are a lot of archaeological finds and everything else that may or may not agree with what the Tanakh says. So give us your tale on this, if you don't mind.
That's a great question. That's not a question I get that much from evangelical Christians, but I get that more from there's other folks, Jewish people who sometimes find science and Torah to be at odds with each other, and I think I should explain. If you ask most scientists, how old is the universe? Most folks are taught that the universe is let's say roughly about 15 billion years old, I guess. And there is an extensive fossil record, and we have all kinds of organic material that can be dated billions of years old, hundreds of millions of years old. And the Torah is quite clear that the world is less than 6,000 years old. You can do the numbers, but we're in the year 5,776 from creation, and those two numbers are so very, very different that they seem almost impossible to get those to even get close. It's not like you're off by a few thousand years and whoops, but we're talking about many billions of years. Is there a resolution to this possibly, or is there none at all, or is it a matter of faith? And this bothers folks a lot, and because there seems to be, as I see it, two extreme positions. One is that the world is 15 billion years old, and then there's a traditional, I'll call it the young Earth belief that the universe is less than 6,000 years old, based on the book of Genesis, based on the record of creation, and therefore those are clearly do not seem to be reconcilable. I mean, that's very, very difficult. But I should make the point, and this surprises many people. In fact, I discussed this recently in my seminar in Jakarta, where we had just a wonderful time. Someone asked about this, he was a Muslim in the audience. And as it turns out, when we use the term that the world, we're in the year 5,776. That will change on Rosh Hashanah. Although we might say, in a conventional sense, that's the age of the world, that's the birthday, Hayom Aris Olam, the age of the world. We really don't mean that. What we do mean is that is how long human beings have been around. That is the time when Adam was created. That Adam was created 5,776 years ago, and we do not discuss, nor does the Torah tell us how old the universe is. Now, I know that many people watching the show are going, wait, Rabbi, slow down there. I may not be a big Bible expert, but I happen to know Genesis chapter 1, and it's very clear there that, how much time are you buying yourself with that kind of response? It appears obvious, it's very clearly stated that the world was created in 6 days. So what did you get, like an extra week, 6 days? How does that change anything? Actually, it changes everything. Because in classical Jewish terms, we really don't know the length of time of each day. And I need to explain this point. You're going, what are you talking about? Well, as it turns out, in traditional Jewish thought, the first thing that God created was time. He created light. That was what God created. Vayhi or, and there was light. That was the first day. But the question is, and in fact, that's how the day is measured. It was evening. It was day. It was day one, and God saw that it was good. But the question is, where was this light emanating from? And you go, what are you talking about? Well, as it turns out, if a careful look, and that means if you dig just a little bit, not a lot, But even a perfunctory reading of Genesis 1 will bring to the surface that the sun was created on the fourth day, not on the first day, which means that that light, which we don't know the source of it, but it clearly was not the sun was created on day 4, was a primordial light. It means God created light long before he created the sun. And therefore we just don't know. We have no idea how long those first days of creation were. Now, there are theoretical physicists like Dr. Gerald Schroeder, an MIT PhD, who's written extensively on this. I'm not familiar with quantum mechanics. It's like, to me, I tried, but it just very, very strange type of science. But he does understand. He's a lot smarter than I am. So you can go to that book for more about that point. But this is the key issue. We just do not know. The Torah is simply silent on the length of the first days of creation. We have no idea how long those 6 days were. The Torah is silent. You ask yourself the question, well, why would the Torah be silent about something that significant? Well, as it turns out, what is the purpose of the Torah? Why was it given? Well, the name Torah literally means teaching. So the Torah not only is the Torah, meaning classically the 5 books of Moses, but the word itself means teaching. And therefore, the Torah is interested in conveying what? It's not a microbiology book, and it's not a history book. It's not a science book. It might use statements about the world that's round in Isaiah. It might use statements about the world, light coming before the sun. Many things, but it is not interested in history. It might use history to convey teachings. There is absolutely nothing about knowing the length of day 2 that tells me how to live my life. It is vital for me to know, in the first chapters laid forth, that God is the sovereign creator of all things. He is omnipotent, and he is, as it says in Isaiah 57, verse 15, he is Shochinad. He stands on eternity. He is outside the boundaries of creation. He is the first cause. Cosmologically, there is nothing before him, and he's eternal, Shochinad. So what comes into view in Genesis 1 is that he is the master, he is our only creator, there is no one else besides him, but we are not given the length of those first days. And it's very clear that there's an enormous ambiguity. We just have no idea. We do know that there was a period of darkness followed by a period of light. Okay? But we don't know. We have no idea how long that period was. Now, that says I want to concentrate. So therefore, in classical Jewish terms, it was Adam, when we celebrate the birthday of the world on Rosh Hashanah, on the first day of the 7th month, we're not celebrating the creation of the universe. We're not celebrating the creation of light, for example, or the creation of water, or the creation of fish. We are celebrating the creation of man because, after all, it was man that is the purpose of all creation. You may think that's, we see ourselves, but the Torah says that, in fact, when God created man, God said it was very, very good. Tov ma'od, it was very good. Because only man is imbued with free will, and man has a choice to make, and he could choose a relationship with God or reject that relation. The plants, the fish, although they are spoken of in Genesis chapter 1 prominently, they only will come up if fish are ever mentioned in the Bible again, or if Scripture will ever make any note of vegetation or plant life. It's only as it relates to man, or else it's completely irrelevant. We don't have chapters talking about fish. The Bible is not about fish because fish don't have free will. Now, so we move along to the question of, well, according to evolutionary biologists, how long has man been around? So there's where we have our clash. So from the literature that I've encountered, I think the consensus seems to be George Gaylord Simpson, Gould, about 200,000 years. Okay, that's what we're told. It means the question that we need to ask ourselves is, and those who are engaging us on this topic, is how long has man been around? Because that's the claim that the statement, the record we have in the Torah is how long, when was Adam created? It's very clear from the Torah. The Torah covers a span of 3,500 years. It's very clear it's slightly less than 6,000 years. Now that diverges quite significantly with what you would find, you'd be taught at a university, that if you ask your professor in biology, how long have, not Lucy, okay, not, something else that has a completely different pelvis and a completely different brain size, and just common DNA and very similar, which we would expect. After all, if there's one creator, so just like lahavdil, to separate, but we would expect that, I don't know if they still have it, the old Buick Riviera, and they have the Buick this, that there's these General Motors cars, these different Chevys, would have some very striking similarities. They're not the same. Why? Because the designer made, but we would anticipate and expect, if there's one creator, that there would be, yes, that we would find among an elephant and a human being an overwhelming amount of material and information that we share in common. Why? We have one creator. On the other hand, if we believe in some pagan religion that says there's a different God that created fish and all marine animals, as opposed to another God that created man in some way, so we would not expect to, I understand why the ancients thought that way, but it was Abraham who said, no, there's one God. We know now, of course, there's one creator, so we would expect to have that a human being and a shark would have, or certainly even more so, a dolphin would have an enormous amount of DNA in common. But the question is the following. The general consensus, again, for man, how long has man been around in evolutionary biology, is about 200,000 years. If you, that's an enormous difference. I mean, 6,000 years, which is what the Torah, the record that we encounter in the Torah, and this claim that human beings, and this is very important, not something like us, not some, no, they don't say orangutans, we're descendants of orangutans, but rather we have a common ancestor. I'm not talking about something else. The key is to sort of corner that question down with someone asserting this point, that human beings, this is very important to ask the question, you mean human beings with all the facilities that I have, the ability to write, to create, to put together poetry. Human beings like me have been around for 200,000 years. I would even, shave off 50,000 years and make it 150,000 years, just to kind of make it easy for them. So the question is, how old is, in fact, the ancient civilizations that we encounter? For example, what do we have where we have an extensive record for? Nations that have been around a very long time. Let's take the Jews out of it because we don't want to engage in circular reasoning. Now let's take an example of, I'm in Indonesia, so I'm not that far from China. We're in pretty much the same part of the world. This is a people, a nation that have geographically, they have a great piece of land surrounded by water, huge, very defensible, an enormous population, and they've been around for a very long time. And they actually, until 500 years ago, the Chinese were, in many ways, at the forefront of technology, until the West started catching up. How old is Chinese history? How old are the dynasties they have? I mean, a real written record, how old is it? And I encourage you who want to know, can I trust in the Torah? Is it a dependable work? Is this the word of Hashem? Well, this is a fundamental question. Well, as it turns out, we have B'nai Noach who are Chinese who come to our congregation. There are many here in Indonesia. They will tell you, anyone who's studied Chinese history, how old is it? Basically about 5,000 years old. Why 5,000? Why not 40,000 years? That means, what the heck was going on in China for 145,000 years? Again, I'm shaving off 50,000. I don't want to be cute and say I'm giving them a discount. What I want to do is I want to remove the argument that there was. I want to know when human beings with basically the requisite cognitive, speaking, writing abilities that I have, not something else. I know 60 Minutes, not kidding, 60 Minutes had a whole show on elephants that can paint. I'm not talking about that. And I'm not discussing just do they find in Australia writings on the wall of a cave in Africa somewhere. Because what they're measuring with carbon-14 is, if let's say I take a pen, and this pen was made 1,000 years ago. This writing instrument is 1,000 years old. And I write it on some organic material that's 25,000 years old, and then I just now write a letter, and someone in 50 years from now measures the ink or measures the writing material, it's not going to come up 50 years, it's going to come up to be 1,000 years. They're measuring the age of the materials that are being used. So what we want to do is we're looking for, because there is so much really at stake here, of can I trust this book? Who's the author of this book? This is not about black holes. Are there black holes or not black holes? You read the Tuesday New York Times, the science section, most people don't care. I mean, if you're a physicist, it's very interesting. For most people, what difference does it make? I mean, if Hawkins is right or wrong, or if he's right like this way or that way, how does it change how I live my life tomorrow? Meaning how I conduct myself morally, ethically. I don't know, but it's certainly, who is the author of the Torah? Who wrote these words? Who conveyed them? Can I trust my life and eternity on these timeless words? So the question you need to ask is, we take a look at the civilization of the Egyptians. I mean, we talk about the Chinese and the Egyptians as an example. They both ancient and very well recorded. Again, why do they all go back 5,000, 6,000 years old? Why? Why don't we have ancient? And you might say, well, they may not need it. That's nonsense. Because if human beings were around 50,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago, when I say again human beings, I don't mean some really cool monkey. I'm talking about this, okay? It's this, okay? How long has this been around? Because, okay, so people would have had to have kingdoms, would have had to have currency. They would have had to gone to war. Why? People were fighting over lechem, bread, sustenance, women, land. It is clearly not very effective to go to battle alone with a club in your hand. It's very effective for a lot of people with a common cause who are part of a clan, a tribe, some sort of nation that has a land, language, and history in common, to go to battle as a unit. Now, in order to do that, you need leadership. You need a general. You need a king. This would have been absolutely necessary. Well, we don't find that. We don't find a nation today with a continuous history that dates itself back in 25,000 years. Where is the poetry of this world? How come we don't have a single something like Shakespeare? It doesn't have to be that kind of quality of writing, but where is your Pushkin? It means we're asked to believe the following, and whatever you want to use Sagan's number, whatever. Let's say you take 100,000. Let's just shave it off. I'll even say 100,000 years because there's some disagreement, and I'll try to take the number to make it as easy as possible, because this is what we're being asked to believe. If, let's say, human beings, so again I've just taken another 50,000 years off, if we are being asked to believe that people like me, with somewhat my intelligence, my ability, I mean human, okay, not something else, not some sort of monkey that is, just had an enormous amount of skills. I've dived with dolphins. They actually have, when we dive, they have an underwater ball that we can throw the dolphins, and dolphins will push back to us in the wild. I mean, this is not it. I mean, these are highly intelligent animals. I know you love your dog, but what are the intelligence of dogs? You have a 3 or 4, like equivalent of a 3-year-old or 4-year-old. Dolphins have the intelligence of a 7, 8-year-old. I mean, these are highly intelligent animals. I mean, when you encounter them in the wild, it just shocks you. These are not fish. These are not fish. Fish have brains, but you're interacting now with something that can really, but where is the poetry? I mean, what we're being asked to believe is that for 194,000 years, or for 94,000 years, I'll just remove 100,000 years. For 94,000 years, not a single piece of poetry has been written. We have stuff that's a few thousand years old. We have the beautiful fables that we know about, the hare and the tortoise. That's nearly a few thousand years old. We have all that stuff from the ancient world. No one wrote a love letter? Now, I recognize that much of it would not survive. The vast majority wouldn't survive. But if 1%, we don't have one nation with an unbroken chain of history that dates back 25,000 years, not one anywhere in the entire earth. That means we're asked to believe that for 94,000 years, not a single piece of poetry was written. Nothing. Zero. There was no civilization. No record of any civilization. Nothing. But something happens where we start to look around at the world, and we notice that roughly about 5,000 years, which would date back to the time the Tower of Babel, this is we're talking about Genesis 11, when the nations are then dispersed, that suddenly we encounter nations with histories, with poetry, with literature. So therefore, number one, when we talk about the age of the world in the Torah, in classical Jewish thinking, we're talking about the age, the time when God created man. We don't know how long the days that preceded it. If somebody, whatever your position is, that would not be against, or that's not relevant. The key question is, how long have people like us been around? And when we examine the evidence, it's shocking. Because what we find is that something happened nearly 6,000 years ago when men were able to write. They were able to form societies and civilizations and currencies, elaborate currencies, poetry and love, and build monuments to their parents and to the people who they loved who died. Why did this happen? Why don't we have literature from 15,000 years ago? Why don't the Chinese, people so populous and so successful, it's not that the Chinese did not have enemies. Believe me, they had plenty of enemies. And because they had enemies, they built fortifications in order to protect themselves. But what ended up happening was that nations that came to attack the Chinese, and the Chinese had an enormous amount of resources and plenty of reasons for outsiders to invade China. Very good reason. There are a lot of things that China had that others wanted, and the Chinese knew it. But what ended up happening was, frequently in history, and we have the records of it, is that nations would, instead of defeating the Chinese or overwhelming the Chinese would simply swallow them up. Now, why don't we have a 30,000-year history of the Chinese? Why don't we have the literature written by? I mean, when you talk about the ancient dynasties and the statues and from the dynasties that we're very familiar with, please look up the dates. They all date 5,000, 6,000 years old. Let's say 7,000 years, because there could be some variance. Why? Where is the record? Do you really have enough faith to believe that for 94,000 years, people really didn't invent anything, accomplish anything, nothing. That means that we iron, no, that's after it. Bronze, after it. Everything after it. Why? We know the answer, because we have a Torah. And a lot is at stake. But the question is, how much faith do you have? I don't have enough faith to believe that.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה בתפארה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה בתפארה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה בתפארה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה והוא היה והוא הווה בתפארה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה